This is part three of the history of Thanksgiving. And in this one, I'm going to break down the American tradition of Thanksgiving and where it originated and where certain parts of what we now practice today pick up. So first, the pre-independence history. We know that many cultures and civilizations throughout world history celebrated an autumn harvest. Native Americans in the Northeast were no different. And so well before the arrival of any pilgrims in the Mayflower, there were Thanksgivings. In fact, there was even a noted and documented Thanksgiving of Englishmen that took place prior to the Pilgrims in 1619 at the Berkeley Hundred Colony. A religious service to remember the ship's arrival was called for. However, a Native American attack in 1622 led to the abandonment of that colony. And with that, really the origin of that story of being a first English Thanksgiving. Also, William Bradford wrote The History of the Plymouth Plantation, and in 1855 and 1856, it was just uncovered as existing. And in that work, he describes the meal that is shared in Plymouth in pretty decent detail. Reverend John Cotton of the 1800s says that we sometimes, upon extraordinary occasions, set apart a day of humiliation, or upon special mercies, we set apart a day of thanksgiving. And so that, again, ties back into that 1621 autumn date between the Wampanoag and the Pilgrims. Now, in the United States, November 28th in 1782, that's our first officially celebrated holiday in all 13 states, and it celebrates the Continental Army's victory over the British at the Battle of Yorktown. And that it's kind of that celebration of we are now an independent and sovereign country, although the peace treaty still has to get signed, but it's going to be. It just takes a while to get to Europe and back. Anyway, in 1789, President Washington declares Thursday, November 26th as a day to give thanks. Although this call does not become a year-to-year holiday, 1789 correlated with the beginning of governing under the new Constitution. That is now the old Constitution that we still use since then. Either way, New England states do happen to keep the practice of celebrating Thanksgiving on a pretty regular basis through this time period, but it's not an official federal holiday. Now, an individual named Sarah Josepha Hale comes about. She is the editor of Godey's Lady's Book, and she's also the author of Mary Had a Little Lamb. In her novel, Northwood, she dedicates an entire chapter going over the practices that she, growing up in New England, practiced and the way that Thanksgiving worked there. She pushes for a national holiday by writing to governors and senators and congressmen. And she does get, although, maybe it's on their own accord, but several states do have holidays to celebrate family and blessings. And so some Thanksgivings do pop up, but through her letter writing campaign, she does become well known as pushing Thanksgiving. In 1863, Lincoln calls for a national Thanksgiving. Now, as a side note, he is the sixth president that Josepha Hale had contacted, and so sixth time is the charm, apparently. But after the Battle of Gettysburg in July and with the atrocities of the American Civil War, Lincoln on October 3rd, which is the same day that Washington used just in 1789, calls for a national day of thanks. Now, after Lincoln, this becomes a tradition for the president to call for a day of thanks each year. Franklin Delano Roosevelt tried to move it from the 4th to the 3rd Thursday in November as a way to extend the Christmas season. And in 1941, Congress undid that by officially establishing the 4th holiday in November as our nationally celebrated day of thanks. Now, the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag were not a part of Lincoln's nor Washington's Thanksgiving. Public interest in those individuals grows. Longfellow's The Courtship of Miles Standish, which is a poem he had wrote, leads to some interest in the Pilgrims. Governor Bradford's lost manuscripts of the Plymouth Plantation being recovered also leads to increased interest, so that by 1890 is when you see this interest between these two groups becoming a part of what we celebrate as the Thanksgiving story. By the 20th century, you see the Pilgrims being used to teach certain values. The story was used to Americanize immigrants into schools and to teach certain Puritan values as opposed to country or cultural ones. Now, when you look at the modern Thanksgiving, we have a lot of different components that have been added over time, and some that are very long-lasting and some that are modernly new. Long-lasting is this idea of traveling to return to your home or to your family and getting together to see those that maybe a day-to-day schedule doesn't allow you to do. Since 1934, we've been trying to watch the Lions attempt to play football, sometimes successfully, but mostly we know what happens. But the Lions and that tradition of football has gone hand in hand now with Thanksgiving. And with some of that football and with some of that more modern times, we also celebrate those soldiers who are stationed abroad, unable to be able to make that same travel home with their family. And of course, we do have a large commercialism that goes with it, as evidenced by Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade and all of the festivities that go with that, and kind of the official kickoff into the holiday season. So as we teach Thanksgiving in an elementary school setting, as a secondary teacher, I can get into more of the historical concept. The issue becomes how much or how little of some of those historical stories are shared to, one, be historically accurate, but then to also be appropriate with what students are able to understand or should comprehend at a young age. Where I leave that up to you is professional discretion, trying to share what I know and have read about Thanksgiving and its history so that you can make the best judgment call as to how to educate your own students in celebrating a holiday that is fantastic and is a part of who we are, but doing so in a way that puts the full scale and picture into perspective as to why we're thankful and for what we can and should give thanks. So, hey, thank you for listening to these videos, and I appreciate all the work and time and effort that goes into being a teacher of our young children.